Well, welcome to the Snowbirds Expat Radio Podcast. I'm your host, Gerry Scott. Now, today's episode is going to be very interesting because we seem to talk about immigration and taxation, both in the United States and Canada. But today is something that's going to be very interesting because a lot of us snowbirds, we go down south and we tend to not look after our skin. We tend to burn. And today we've got a dermatologist, Dr. Jason Rivers, on our call today. And I'm excited because my wife, which she used to call on all the dermatologists, knows Jason quite well. And it was brought to our attention that we should actually have somebody who knows what they're talking about when it comes to the sun and what sunscreens we should be using, et cetera. So I asked Melissa, will you give Jason a call and see if he could be so kind to be on our podcast today? So we've got Jason. And before I go into the questions, Jason, tell those snowbirds out there that are burning and need your help, tell them more about yourself, your education, and we're going to talk about some of the products you developed as well. So please go ahead. Welcome.
Thanks, Gerry. Thanks for having me on the show. And I will attest that your wife is very nice.
That's good.
My background, I'm a Canadian and now a senior citizen, part of that crowd. And that's more than 65, not the 55 crowd. Originally from Ottawa, I did my undergraduate training in Toronto, my medicine in Ottawa, and then did some general practice out in the Maritimes and emergency medicine, and then went back to Ottawa, started my dermatology, finished it in England, and then I did 3 years after I became a dermatologist, so further training in New York and in Australia, both in the area of skin cancer. And then I was recruited to the University of British Columbia, where I worked full-time and became professor, still a clinical professor, but left about 17 years ago to open my own clinic, which is Pacific Derm. I have a number of dermatologists who work with me. And like a cobbler working in his workshop, I do other things too. So I do a lot of research. And as you mentioned and alluded to, I started a skincare company called Riversol, which is selling products primarily online, but we have bricks and mortar stores across Canada, with 500 locations actually, that sort of are Canadian-based products that are made here in Canada, but our secret sauce, if you will, comes from the Pacific red cedar tree, which we can talk about later if you wish.
Well, that's interesting because, I got to say, I am one of those guys that, Melissa, my wife, is so disciplined. I mean, we do get to spend a lot of time in Maui. She is so good at putting on that lotion. She runs every morning. And I'm guilty of at least one or two good burns every time I'm in Maui. And other than the sunscreen that's available at the golf club, I think the reason why I hesitate to put the sunscreen on because it's such a heavy paste nowadays. And I go from being white to almost a shiny white. So I don't know what it is about me, but I'm sure I'm like a lot of folks. But this show that we have today, which is we're going to be talking about skincare, we're going to follow this up with another good friend of mine. His name is Tommy Europe. And Jason, not sure if you're a CFL football fan, but Tommy had played in the CFL for a number of years with the Winnipeg, BC, and I think he was also with the Montreal Alouettes as well. He's going to be talking about fitness for snowbirds. So the next two podcasts we have are going to be allocated towards healthcare, which Jason will be covering well today. And then Tommy will be covering fitness for snowbirds because Jason, you look young. And I know we talked about your age the other day, and good for you. You're looking fantastic. And I'm soon to be 63 in the next couple of days. So I'll tell you, I'm one of those, the snowbirds that's the peak of the baby boom, 1961. And we have a lot of concerns out there. May it be health, may it be skincare, et cetera. So I'm going to jump right into the questions, and I'll tell you something. I'm going to be a sponge today because I've never had this conversation with anybody, Melissa, other than being your typical wife that cares, will tell me you need to put on sunscreen. And I go, yeah. And then before you know, I've got another burn. So Jason, here goes. Does a tan protect you against sun damage?
Well, a tan actually is a body's response to damage. So it's not really going to help you prevent major issues to your skin. And to think that just a tan is the way to go is not smart, because what happens effectively with a tan is that when we're exposed to ultraviolet light, the skin reacts to try and prevent more damage, and it releases chemicals which allow pigment cells to release melanin, or the pigment, which helps to protect against UV damage, ultraviolet damage. But unfortunately, it's not enough to really prevent you getting further damage, which includes things like premature aging of the skin, wrinkles, sunspots, skin cancer. And skin cancer is a major issue. We understand that having a lot of sunburns, especially before the age of 18, can increase your risk for skin cancer significantly. But unfortunately, we're seeing that cumulative sun exposure is also something that leads to the development of skin cancer down the road. So, in summary, a tan is somewhat protective, but for people who are fair skinned like you, Gerry, you're not going to get a huge tan. So, therefore, you're not going to be very protected from your own skin's natural protective mechanisms.
Well, I do have to say is that I do wear a long sleeve shirt all the time. I'm not one of those guys that maybe when I was younger and I was fitter, I was running around without a shirt on. But I do have, I always wear a hat and I always do wear a long sleeve shirt no matter where I go. So it's just my face and my ears and all these other things which I'm sure where cancer would develop with the lack of care that a lot of us snowbirds show. So, what is the best way to protect yourself against the potential harmful effects of the sun?
Well, I mean, the first thing is not to be in it. So, shade is a very good thing to consider. And, the sun is most severe, at least during daylight savings times, between 11 and 3 p.m., or 10 and 2, if you will, if you're in the middle of the winter and you're down south. So those are the peak period of time of solar insolation when you should be most careful. And quite frankly, when it's so hot out, you don't really want to be lying out there baking like a piece of bacon, really. The most important thing is what you pointed out is clothing, because clothing is an easy way to protect your skin from the sun. You don't have to worry about missed areas of application of sunscreen, for example. Hats are important, and when we talk about a hat, we're not talking about like the Donald Trump baseball cap. We're talking about a wide brim hat with about a 3.5 inch or 7.5 centimeter brim. So wide brim, like a Tilly hat. You shouldn't forget sunglasses, because sun and the UV rays therein are very important for causing cataracts and may have a role to play in macular degeneration as well. So don't forget your eyes. And then finally, you alluded to the fact that there are exposed areas like the ears or the face. That's where sunscreen comes into play too, and you have to choose your sunscreen appropriately.
When you start talking about baseball caps, I mean, one thing we did put a lot of time into last year was looking at those things called bucket hats. And I don't know if that was from that show called Caddyshack, but we really did source it out, and they're not as popular as one finds. Is that I think we went to about 5 or 6 suppliers, and even then we went to Lululemon at one time, and they didn't even have something that was great. There was a company that we use in the States, which is called PXG, that does all the golf clubs. And they came out with some really nice bucket caps, which I'm notorious for wearing. But it is now, and it gets me thinking that there must be a lot of golfers in my demographics that are born in '61 that must be coming to see you these days. They're the guys that have used the sun more than anybody.
Yeah, and in fact, we know that guys tend to take their shirts off when they're down at the beach, and they tend to lie in the sun a lot more than women to some degree. And we're finding that, in point of fact, it's this demographic, the white male over age 60, over age 70, who's actually getting more significant skin cancer, specifically melanoma, and dying from it. So this is a concern, and this is a preventable cancer. And unfortunately, a lot of people are still not aware of the fact that a tan may seem like a great thing, but unfortunately, the damage is done before you have a tan, and that's why you have a tan, because it's trying to stop you from getting more damage. And the same thing goes for tanning beds. People think that tanning beds are great because they give you a base tan, and that base tan will protect you against further damage, but that's not the case. In fact, we know, especially for younger individuals, data shows that the risk for melanoma can be increased as much as 75% if people are using tanning beds before the age of 35. And skin cancer is like, and sun damage for that matter, is like smoking. You don't get lung cancer after you smoke 1 or 2 cigarettes. It's usually from years of exposure that eventually your cells say, enough's enough, I can't fix the damage. And that's when you start seeing mutations happen in the cells, and as a result, cancer developing thereafter. And we're talking about just, in the last instance, just melanoma, which is a concern because it is highly likely to kill people if it's left too long and not treated at an early stage. The other forms of skin cancer, basal cell skin cancer and squamous cell carcinoma, are much more common. They affect 1 in 7 individuals. And although they're not usually fatal, they are locally destructive and can end up in a lot of deformity if you have to have surgery. And when I say deformity, that means people can lose eyes, they can lose ears, they can lose a nose. It can be very gruesome. And so this is where the adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
When you talk about people that have lost their life, I think of Jimmy Buffett and how much time that he spent in the sun, and he died from melanoma, I believe.
Yes. Well, yeah. Even people like our previous Premier Bourassa from Quebec died of melanoma. Here in British Columbia, famous skier Dave Murray died of melanoma. So there's lots of people, even Bob Marley, who is dark skinned, developed and died from melanoma. So skin cancer can affect everybody, and that's one of the myths that, it's only light-skinned individuals who get skin cancer, but that's not the case. Everybody can get skin cancer. It's true that people who have darker skin have a much lower rate of skin cancer, but because of sometimes health disparities, those of darker skin color are often diagnosed at a later stage, and therefore the consequences are more dire for them.
Well, we've always said that, the importance of, this podcast, and we've always talked about immigration and tax and so many people going down south. When I had the opportunity to speak to you about, the care that we should be taking, we've never had this conversation. I'm sure, other than mothers, and happy Mother's Day, because it was Mother's Day yesterday, all those mothers that looked after us and were really the enforcers of making sure we put on sunscreen, and wives out there that enforced us. And we kind of always took it as being a bit of maybe kind of a hagging effect, but boy, the importance of learning about this and making sure that we're going to lather up. And I sure hope that going forward after this podcast, I'm going to be I was teasing Jason that I would be his pitch boy or his pitch guy on their products that they developed. But there is some truth to that, because I'll tell you, I've been abusing it just like every other 63-year-old snowbird going down south. So we touched base a little bit about this, but what are some of the myths around sun safety out there?
Well, basically, one of the common myths is the fact that people think that if you go out on a cloudy day, you don't have to worry about sun protection. And I think this is an important one to be aware of, and that is that about 80% of the ultraviolet radiation that you get on a full clear sky day is accessible on a cloudy day, partially cloudy day. Now, of course, if it's raining and you're out there playing golf, you're probably okay. But on an overcast day where you have broken clouds, that is going to still give you a lot of sun exposure. In fact, if you have very light clouds, these cirrus clouds, the wispy little clouds, you can actually get more sun exposure than on a clear day, and that's because of reflection off the cloud surface. So you do have to be careful even in partially cloudy days. The second thing is that water is going to prevent you from getting a sunburn. If you're swimming in the water, you have to understand that UV rays penetrate the water to a couple of feet. So if you're just sort of lying on the surface there, you're going to get fried, sort of like a slow parboil, I guess, if you're a lobster move. So that's one thing. I mentioned briefly about tanning beds, that tanning beds can prevent skin cancer and problems related to the sun. That's a myth. Although tanning beds may help in certain skin conditions, and we can talk about why they do that, they are overall not good and really shouldn't be on the market at all. And then about sunscreen itself, people are concerned that sunscreens can cause cancer, for example. There's no data to support that, though there is information to show that certain ingredients in certain types of sunscreens can actually be absorbed through the body and can be excreted through the urine. So there is some issue related to sunscreens that people should be aware of. And then the second thing is that as a concern about sunscreens, that sunscreens prevent vitamin D formation. That is a myth as well.
Now, what about Maui's notorious for winds? And I've had so many unbelievable wind burns out there on a sunny day. That must be a pretty serious problem as well, too.
Well, the wind is actually not causing the burn. The wind is making you feel cool at the time because it's a cooling agent, but you're getting burnt because you're out there and it's the sun's UV radiation that's causing the burn. So even if it's a windy day, you're still going to get exposure to UV radiation, and that's what the main culprit is in causing that, in quotes, burn.
We used to have this before we had the fires in Lahaina. We had the Lahaina Yacht Club, and we had this Victoria to Lahaina race. And you'd see these sailors come in, and they are just, they're got to be some of the worst offenders when it comes to maybe there isn't a sunscreen for those guys.
Well, it's interesting about sunscreens, and, since we're just laying the cards on the table, sunscreens have been shown to reduce the risk for squamous cell carcinoma and also melanoma. And we did some of the work on that. It was sort of an inferential study, but we did that like 30 years ago. There's very little, if any, data to support the fact that sunscreens have any impact on the most common type of skin cancer, which is called basal cell carcinoma. Now, that said, it doesn't mean don't use sunscreen. It means that we don't have the information, and it may be a different mechanism, but we do know that all these common types of skin cancers are related to sun exposure, and that they are likely preventable to some degree by reducing your sun exposure as well.
When we talk about sunscreen, we hear about this SPF 30, SPF 60. A guy like myself who's very fair skin, is it safe to assume that I should be using like a 60 or 80 or 100 or 200? What should the average person be using?
Well, the first thing you have to understand is how is an SPF calculated and what does it even mean? SPF means sun protective factor, and it's primarily a measure of the sunscreen's ability to prevent ultraviolet B damage. Now, to back up 1 second, ultraviolet rays are broken up into three forms: UVC, UVB, and UVA. UVC we generally don't see on the Earth because the ozone layer blocks it out. UVB is what we attribute to burning and skin cancer, and UVA also is not innocuous and can contribute to a number of skin conditions, along with tanning and along with skin cancer. So when we measure an SPF, we're looking primarily at the UVB component. So a sunscreen's ability to block sun's rays is measured by putting on the back of a volunteer a small dollop of sunscreen in an amount of 2 milligrams per centimeter squared, so 2 milligrams in a patch. And then you shine an artificial light source on it, and you see how long it takes for that person to burn. And a sunscreen that, let's say you burn normally in 10 minutes, if a sunscreen has an SPF factor of 15, under test conditions, it would take 15 times the 10 minutes, so 150 minutes to burn. Similarly, if you had an SPF of 30, it would be 30 times 10 minutes, so 300 minutes to burn. So that's all fair and good. Now, the problem is that in real life, people don't do what you're supposed to do on the bottle. People get a sunscreen bottle that's 120 mils, about 4 ounces. They throw it in their glove box for their car, and then they might put it on, after they're already starting to burn. So people don't put on sunscreen before they leave the house, number one. Number two, there's lots of studies to show that, especially in families, that people, from the time they get to the beach to the time the last person puts on sunscreen is almost an hour. And the last person to put it on, as you can imagine, is the mother who's putting it on everybody else. So she can get burned in that scenario. But to your point about, do I need a 30 or a 60? If you burn in, let's say, 20 minutes and you've got an SPF of 15 or 30, that's 600 minutes. That's 10 hours, right? So why do you need to go higher? Well, the problem is that for most people, they don't put on sunscreen enough. People put on about a half to a quarter of the amount you're supposed to put to get that SPF rating. So if you have an SPF of 30, you may be getting an actual protection factor of 2 or 4, even depending on how you apply it. So there is some argument to say, yes, go higher. But remember that in absolute numbers, an SPF that blocks that of 30 blocks 98% of the UV radiation, whereas a SPF of 97%, whereas an SPF of 60 blocks 98%. So you're not really going up a lot in terms of the amount of blockage. But because of the fact that people don't put on enough product, that's why you sometimes hear people say, oh, I still get tan when I put on a sunscreen, or I still get burned when I use a sunscreen. They're not using it properly. So the other point, of course, is how you use the sunscreen. And if you are using a sunscreen and it says, people assume that a sunscreen is waterproof, that they'll go in the water, that's not the case either. When you're looking at a package, they've actually removed the names of the word waterproof on sunscreens. And now a sunscreen can only be labeled as water resistant or very water resistant. And that, again, is done in a test situation where somebody is put on a sunscreen, they go into a whirlpool for 40 minutes, and then they come out of the whirlpool, they sit for a bit to dry off, and then they're tested to see how the sunscreen acts, or 80 minutes, which is very water resistant. So it's nothing that's waterproof. People are generally toweling or they're sweating. So that's the reason for reapplication. If you're washing off your sunscreen or not putting on enough of it, that's the issue. So to circle back to your question, Gerry, that is, if you use an SPF 30 properly, that's probably all you need. There are some studies that show that people who use an SPF 100 in Hawaii specifically find that they can get less likely to burn. There's one study that showed that. But I would contend that use a sunscreen of SPF 30 or higher, use it properly, and use clothing as the main factor of trying to protect yourself if that's your real interest.
Now, there's a lot of suntan lotions that have been banned in Maui. What types of lotion and what's in those lotions that's causing such an outcry from an environmental point of view?
Well, you asked me before about my sunscreen line, and that's our line is Riversol, and we use only zinc and titanium dioxide, and they're considered by the FDA as generally safe and effective products. They're reef safe. They, as far as we know, they do not have an impact on coral reefs, and that's one of the reasons why other sunscreens, which are called chemical sunscreens, have been banned in those situations. The products in these sunscreens, and I mentioned one to you before, that can go through the system, such as benzophenone or avobenzone is another product, is that they can cause what's called endocrine disruption, meaning that they can put out like estrogen-like effects on things. and it appears that it may have a negative effect on coral reefs. But quite frankly, although that is true, and every little bit helps, I think our major issue why we're seeing problems with coral reefs is because of global warming and climate change, which is not being addressed quickly enough, or if we can address it at all at this point.
Now, from a consumer's point of view, you walk into the pharmacies and it's very intimidating because there's all kinds of lotions available. And so how do you, from someone like yourself who's world renowned as a dermatologist, how do you come up with your own? Is it because a lot of those products out there, is it safe to assume, are just kind of junky commercial stuff and you wanted to help that market or improve
Well,
it?
I mean, for me, having a smaller company means you can pivot more quickly. You don't have to go through, legal and all these other rubber stamps on making sure that you haven't done anything wrong. But on the other side of the coin is that I can also look at what is potentially useful for the skin, safe for the environment, and safe for the individual, and come up with something that's beneficial. One of the things that I've been trying to do with our sunscreen, and let me back up and say this is why I developed my line, is because I know what's in the product. You can ask a lot of people, including dermatologists, so what are the ingredients in this product line and what do they do? And most people don't have a clue. So for me, it was important to be able to say to my patients, here's what's in the product, and I know the science behind it, and therefore I feel comfortable in recommending it to you. Our product is a zinc and titanium sunscreen. There's lots of other brands out there that are also good, that provide coverage, and it comes down to personal preference to some degree too, because if somebody doesn't want to use a sunscreen because it doesn't feel right on the skin, then they're not going to use a sunscreen and they're going to get no benefit. One of the things that we do have in our line is a tinted line of sunscreens. And you might say, why is this important? And the reason is that one of the common conditions, not skin cancer, but a common condition we see in women is called melasma. And melasma is this pigmentation that can occur on the cheeks, it can occur in the mustache area, forehead, and it can be quite unsightly and quite disturbing for individuals who have this. And what we know, especially for people of color who are darker skin tone, when they get melasma, it's not just the ultraviolet light that's playing a role here, but also visible light. So just the light in your room above your head is playing a role with this as well. So using a sunscreen that has a tint in it blocks out the visible light component, whereas the other components of the sunscreen block out the ultraviolet. So you're getting more broad spectrum coverage in that regard. Now, there's also other reasons to have a broad spectrum sunscreen, and there are conditions like lupus or dermatomyositis, which are conditions which can be activated by the sun and can have not just skin consequences, but also have impact on your kidneys, on your heart, on your joints. And so it's important to try and have products that address a multitude of problems simultaneously. And that's why we did that.
Now, you also mentioned that you use a type of an extraction from cedar as one of the ingredients as well.
Yeah, now the cedar is not necessarily in our sunscreen line, but we use it in all our other products, and that's because the product is called thuioplysin, and it comes from the Pacific red cedar tree, and it has a lot of interesting biological effects. One of them is that, and this is the reason I got interested in the first place, just to digress for a second if we have a minute, is that one of my, when I was at full-time at University of British Columbia, I was approached by a member of the Department of Forestry at University of British Columbia, and he came with me with this bunch of powder in a jar, and he said, well, this is from the red cedar tree. And I said, that's nice. And I started to look into it. And one of the things that piqued my interest was the fact that this ingredient had been shown, at least in the test tube, to be able to inhibit what are called sunburn cells. So when the skin is exposed to the sun and gets damaged, it produces these cells, these damaged cells, which are then extracted through the skin layer over time. And this product had the ability to prevent that or reduce it at least. And so I looked into its properties, and interestingly, the red cedar tree has been used in traditional First Nations medicine for thousands of years. So it's not like I just stumbled on something that's never been used before. But this is clearly something that has anti-inflammatory actions. It does have in the test tube ability to inhibit certain melanoma cell lines. And so that's why we've incorporated that into our product line. It's not an inexpensive ingredient. It's quite expensive per kilo.
Well, for a young child who grew up in Ucluelet on Vancouver Island and being very familiar with cedar and Aboriginal people, I've never ever heard that story before, and I find it fascinating. The last question I have, not last one, I've got a couple more here for you, but what about the idea that we know that the vitamin D that comes from the sun it's so good for our well-being? Mm-hmm. What about the myth that if I had too much sunscreen on, I wouldn't be getting my vitamin D?
Right. Well, vitamin D, you're right, is very, very important. And without it, you get rickets, and it also has multiple other issues to play with bone health in terms of osteoporosis. It has, especially for, we're talking about seniors, where falls and broken hips are one of the leading ways in which people can leave the planet permanently. So vitamin D is thought, and first of all, for people who don't know, it's actually manufactured in the skin. And the common question is, does sunscreen prevent the development of vitamin D because it converts in the skin? And the answer is, to our knowledge, no. If you put on a lot of sunscreen and you're wearing shirts, yes, you can certainly block vitamin D formation. But then the question is, well, what is the amount of sun exposure you need to get your vitamin D? And the answer is basically once the UV index is over 3 or so, if you're getting about 20% of your body surface area exposed for about 10 to 15 minutes a day, you're getting your equivalent to about 1,000 international units of vitamin D. In the wintertime, if you're still up in the north, I haven't become a snowbird yet, then you're not going to get enough vitamin D. Similarly, if you're somebody for cultural reasons who's wearing clothing all the time and covering up, you're not going to get your vitamin D. People who have darker skin are less likely to produce vitamin D in the skin. People who are overweight have lower vitamin D levels because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. But the answer is very simple. Go buy a bottle of vitamin D. They cost you pennies a day. You can take 1,000 or 2,000 international units a day year-round, and you'll get your vitamin D.
Interesting. Now, in British Columbia, is it safe to assume that the only way you can see a dermatologist is when you have a problem and you have to get your GP to refer you to your clinic, or is there other ways that you get to set up a call with Dr. Rivers?
Well, that's a whole other podcast or public health system here.
Yes.
Technically, yes, you need to see a GP, a family doctor who acts as a gatekeeper to come and see a dermatologist. The Canada Health Act is such that you are not allowed to see somebody privately for a medical issue. Now, the question then becomes, well, if I just want to be seen for a skin cancer screening, that actually is not covered by the medical plan, and you could see somebody probably more on an expedited method, but you'd have to pay privately for that. As I say, this is an entirely different discussion, but I personally believe that Canada should come into the 21st century. We are, along with, I believe, North Korea, the only two countries in the world that don't have a mixed private and public system. And to be very specific, Although we now are not allowed to do this, at least outside of Quebec, because Quebec, I believe you can. Um, there was a major court case that was run by Brian Day here in Vancouver, who's an orthopedic surgeon, went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and this went on for over a decade. And unfortunately, it was knocked down. So you can't do that. But that said, if you are a police officer, RCMP, an incarcerated person in Canada, you can get private health care. Unfortunately, in Canada, a lot of times, even our cancer agency has been sending people down to Seattle for cancer care on the public purse. They're sending to a private facility in the States. So, to my knowledge, now, this indicates to me that we're not all playing on the same field all the way through things. And I would, by projection, say, well, if we're doing this for physicians, and we should do this also for dentists, maybe physiotherapy, naturopaths, chiropractors, maybe even extend it to lawyers.
Well, I can't stop thinking. I mean, for someone like our family that does get to spend a lot of time in the sun, I mean, next time Melissa plans to come down to see Dr. Rivers, I'm just going to jump in the car and I don't know. I mean, something has to be done because and I've got great friends that are either VP of Fraser Health, or we've had Mike Horcourt on our podcast, he's almost like a second father to me, and other families that we work for, orthopedic surgeons, et cetera. I'll tell you, it's so, and because we spend so much time in the States, the Americans are saying our healthcare system, I know we're going off into a different tangent. We should probably start another podcast here, but it's so true. I mean, you learn so much about today's episode, and I guess before I go too far, how do I get your sunscreen? Where do people buy it? And how do they know what type of products is best for them when they
well, thanks for the plug.
Yes.
If they're interested in learning about the company, they can simply go to Riversol, Riversol.com. So we sell all our products online over a certain amount. There's free shipping. But for our non-sunscreen related products, we provide people with a free 2-week sample. Like you don't pay for postage. We don't take your credit cards. You just say, I'd like to have a free sample and see if I like this stuff on my skin. And the reason I did this was I want people to try our product before they buy it. And this way you'll know if you like it on the feel on your skin, if you have any reaction to it. Although I think the ingredients that we use are relatively less allergenic than other ingredients out there. Some people do react to them, so it's better that you try it and find out if your skin's compatible with it before you spend any money. We provide people with a 60-day money-back guarantee. So I think we're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. So you can, and if you have questions, we have customer service individuals who can answer those questions for you directly. We sell it, as I said, online. There are a number of locations in Canada, at least, where you can buy them at independent pharmacies. In the States, it's online if you want to purchase it at this point in time, but we do deliver it to the States.
Okay. So if I end up getting some of the sunscreen here, I would have no problem having it in my suitcase and taking it down south with me.
No, the FDA's got no problem with it, and border services have no problem. We do have also, if you're just going down for a weekend, not the sunscreen, but we do have, well, actually the sunscreen too is under 90 mils. So we have travel packs so that you can carry those with you.
Well, I like I say, I after speaking with Melissa, I became very familiar with your products, and I even saw a nice little bag with some of the products that she had the other day. So Melissa has been a big endorser of yours for years. So I know going forward I have to, because I'm bike riding as often as I can. I don't play as much golf as I used to because I am into this mountain biking. But even this weekend, I felt that I had some pretty good sun. on my face, and there I am. Body's well covered, but not the face. But Jason, I'll tell you, it's been a real honor to have you on our show today. And like you say, you mentioned where people can buy your products online, and they can also talk to. There's great support on your website as well too, and the product is available to independent pharmacies. Melissa will love that because her father was a pharmacist. He had several pharmacies up in Kamloops. He was one of the last independents out there, and such a wonderful man as a pharmacist. So. But thank you for your time, and it's very much appreciated.
Well, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to talk about other things in the future. Probably not the general state of the healthcare system, but
well, we're going to have to save that for lunch and maybe a beer or something, because that might both of us get into a bit of a rant here. So thank you very much, and I cannot tell people enough that having someone like Jason on the show has been a lot of fun. And the motto of our show has always been, the world is small, be kind to all. So Jason, thank you once again.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.